The last regulation in this section, where we're concerned with the way equipment is selected, built and installed, is Regulation 12. Part 1 calls for suitable means to be available for cutting off the supply and for isolation of equipment. When the supply is cut off from equipment, or in other words, the equipment is switched off, it is simply deprived of its electrical power. Part 2 of the regulation, however, gives a clear legal definition of isolation: the disconnection and separation of the electrical equipment from every source of electrical energy in such a way that the disconnection and separation is secure. We'll be saying more about this when we look at Regulation 13. Part 3 exempts equipment such as generators and batteries from the regulation, including microgeneration equipment, since they're a source of energy in themselves. However, precautions must be taken when working on such sources of energy to prevent danger so far as is reasonably practicable. That brings us to the end of the regulations concerned with equipment itself. The next 3 regulations, 13, 14 and 15, relate to the way work is performed on equipment. However, they should not be seen as a separate entity, since if equipment is well designed, well built and well installed, complying with regulations 13 and 14 in particular will be that much easier. Also, regulations 12 and 13 are both an integral part of the isolation procedure, which we're going to run through now, at low voltage, so you can appreciate the practicalities involved. To begin with, Regulation 12 not only contains the legal definition of isolation, which we gave you earlier, it also recognises that it's important to identify the right circuit or piece of equipment which you're going to isolate, mentioning methods of identifying circuits. In practice, these are up-to-date drawings of the system from the transformer to the final circuits, and a well-labelled installation with circuit schedules in all the distribution boards. If the equipment is still running, you will have to cut off its supply or switch it off before operating the isolator. This is because some isolators are not designed for switching duties. It's also, of course, essential to make sure you have permission to switch off. You may also consider carrying out a risk assessment for any non-electrical hazards, such as surface water. So, having correctly identified and switched off the equipment, isolation can be carried out by switching the isolator or circuit breakers to the open or off position, or withdrawing all fuses, or withdrawing all plugs. The technique used will depend on the supply arrangements to the equipment. This is not sufficient, however, since Regulation 13 requires that precautions are taken to prevent the equipment becoming charged while work is in progress, and this is achieved by locking off. For example, the isolator or circuit breakers must be padlocked in the open position. Fuse carriers or fuse boards must be locked, and the fuses securely retained. All plugs must be locked into plug lockouts.
Notice that the word charged is used, not live. So the presence of stored or induced electrical energy also has to be considered. Keys used for locking off, and also any fuses removed, must remain under the control of the person carrying out the work whilst they're working on the equipment. Caution signs must also be posted at all points of isolation. And a means of identifying the person who carried out the isolation is useful, so they can be traced if necessary.
Lastly, and most importantly, before starting work, the circuit must be proved dead. To do this, first check your voltage indicator, then check for dead, and then check your voltage indicator again. That is a typical isolation procedure and is a fundamental requirement for electrical work to be carried out on equipment made dead. We do cover this topic in much more detail, especially for work in domestic premises, in the Learning Lounge video, Safe Isolation Procedures. Isolations can also be carried out under a permit to work. A permit to work will be issued when a duty holder is isolating for someone else to carry out work. The duty holder must ensure that the isolation procedure is followed as before. However, it is important that the duty holder must personally check for dead, and demonstrate this to whoever is receiving the permit. The receiver of the permit must add their own electrical safety lock, retaining the key in their possession, confirm that they're satisfied the equipment is dead, and that all the precautions are adequate before signing the permit. Don't forget that the Electricity at Work regulations cover all voltages, including high voltage, or HV for short. The fundamentals of isolation at high voltage are the same as for low voltage, but isolation at HV is normally only carried out at HV circuit breakers or isolators. A switching schedule is written detailing all the switching activities necessary to achieve a safe and secure isolation, which will include earthing the isolated circuits. Work on high voltage equipment requires specialist knowledge and experience, and the isolation procedure will form a necessary part of the training to be able to carry out such work.